In the course of just several weeks in power, President Donald Trump has forced a rethink of the US's alliances, having its partners around the world thinking, with friends like these, well, you know the rest. But there's one country that is witnessing these changes from an especially close vantage point: Canada. The White House's trade war and Trump's repeated threats to annex the US's neighbor to the north have made Canadians fear for the future. We spoke to Peter Boehm. He's a senator for Ontario, that is a region that shares a border with the United States. He spoke to us about his view of US-Canada relations as seen from his side of the fence. Here's what he had to say. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. If you could start by introducing yourself, that would be wonderful.
My name is Peter Boehm. I'm a senator representing the province of Ontario in Canada's Senate, and I chair the Foreign Affairs and International Trade Committee of the Senate. In my previous life, I was a deputy minister, and I also had the very good fortune of being ambassador of Canada to Germany.
So, Senator, you're very well placed to answer the questions that we currently have on US-Canada relations. It's a very sort of fast-moving issue, lots of moving parts. Where would you say that US-Canada relations currently are?
It's complicated with us because we have had a tremendously useful and friendly relationship with the United States for the duration of our country's existence. And I should say that we're the third oldest democracy in the world in terms of constitutional democracies. And during that period, we've had immensely great cooperation, both trade flows and people flows. We have stood with the Americans, or they have stood with us in world wars on various international issues. And certainly at the time of 9/11, we were there to help, and we have been there ever since. So the relationship is almost symbiotic, which is why at this particular time, it is a very difficult moment because we are not used to being shunned, attacked, insulted by our best friend to the south. And when I say our best friend, it's the leader, it's Donald Trump, the president, who has not just announced tariffs and is implementing them, contrary to the North American Free Trade Agreement, which he insisted had to be renegotiated the last time, and which he signed, but also insulting our head of government and insisting that our country was ripe for annexation. I don't think any Canadian would agree with him, quite frankly.
How is Canada currently dealing with a sea change in the relationship with the US?
Well, it's multifaceted. So certainly at the executive level, ministers, prime minister, we have a new prime minister, Mark Carney, will be engaging with the administration, with counterparts at the subnational level. So premiers of provinces, like your Minister President in Germany, and state governors, they are in touch, and certainly along the border states, because 37, if not 38, of the US states has Canada as their largest trading partner. So there's a lot of movement across the border. Some of it is devoted to security, but a lot of it is related to commerce. So at this time, it's important to have messages going back and forth. It's important to have dialogue, but it's also important to indicate that we do not like these procedures that have been put in place, tariffs and other measures. We do not like the rhetoric, and we are retaliating measure for measure.
How does one achieve this balancing act of standing up to Donald Trump and his policies while also wanting to return the relationship to the way it was?
Well, that's the essence of diplomacy, because my definition, and it's one that others use as well, is that diplomacy is the art of letting someone else have your way. So you have to find meeting points in between, points of reference, so everyone gets something out of it. But to use the phrase that's been used in the United States, to flood the zone with initiatives, with executive orders, with commentary, it puts other countries, and certainly ours, on a bit of a back foot. How do you react to that? It's unprecedented. The best we can do is to stand up for ourselves, but also keep all points of dialogue open.
When you say it's important to establish meeting points, what sort of meeting points have been coming up in these engagements between the US and Canada that make you hopeful that something can be achieved?
Well, certainly on the question of border security, and here it is the issue of fentanyl that has been used by President Trump as the trigger for bringing in tariffs. In point of fact, 0.02 of the fentanyl that enters the United States had been traced through Canada. So that's a very, very small amount. And it has, of course, provoked something of a reaction here, but also a policy reaction in that we've strengthened border measures even further. And this was done even before the president was inaugurated. So $1.3 billion has been invested in greater border security. But that has also led us to believe that that is not the real issue for President Trump. He actually wants to use tariffs as a revenue gathering source. It will inflict pain on the American people, as it will and already is doing on us Canadians. But he will use this to gather revenue, whether it's to promote another tax cut, whether it's to weaken our economy so as to strengthen the U.S. economy. Time will tell. So I get back to my point. There are a lot of things where we need to be discussing matters. Our ministers responsible for border security are engaged with their American counterparts. So to the immigration ministers, the finance minister, and the minister responsible for trade. So there's a lot of activity going on, but it's not clear whom best to speak to because we are not getting one message. So we'll get a message that might seem conciliatory and one of understanding, and then the president will post something on Truth Social that makes absolutely no sense to us. So we've not been in a position like this before. We are negotiators. We're global citizens. We are the 10th largest economy in the world, and it is beginning to look like there's an attempt for a hostile takeover or a special economic operation to just kind of show off what the Russians said about Ukraine being a special military operation. This one seems to be a special economic operation. So we're not happy.
I can imagine, sir. Now, you mentioned, of course, you do have a new prime minister in Mark Carney. He was perhaps also carried to that position because of his fighting words, because of his defensive posture towards Donald Trump. That's something that's proved popular, at least within the Liberal Party. What do you think he will be able to effect?
If this approach by the U.S. administration persists, it means we will have to look for new markets, better markets. We do have a free trade agreement with the European Union. Let's put more heft behind it, etc. But also there's a need for some solidarity because according to Mr. Trump's calendar on April 2nd, there will be tariffs on everybody in terms of trying to get some sort of an egalitarian approach as he sees it. The U.S. has a trade deficit with us. It is not significant. He's blown it out of proportion, but a deficit does not constitute a subsidy. And much of this is cut rate oil and gas that is going south of the border. So there are many different aspects to this, and Mr. Carney may be looking for other markets. I should add, we are anticipating an election, a federal election, and what he will want to do, and certainly what the opposition candidates will want to do, is to reassure Canadians that they are all in terms of dealing with this unprecedented crisis.
Is there any way to weather this crisis without extreme pain to the Canadians?
It's hard to say, and it's probably too soon. The government can take fiscal measures to provide support. to Canadians, particularly to small businesses that might be impacted. President Trump has indicated he wants to target the auto industry. The auto industry in North America is integrated. Large auto manufacturers are located in different countries. The German auto manufacturers are good examples of that. But the parts can go over the Canada-U.S. border, the U.S.-Mexico border, and back and forth several times before a car actually rolls off the assembly line. So if his objective is to relocate the car industry entirely in the U.S., including parts manufacturers, obviously that sector could be very hard hit, and it will take time for the impact to be felt. But Mr. Trump has said that this is his objective, so we shall see. Governments can offer support. Government of Canada is also speaking with the government of Mexico. They're in this as well. We thought we had a pretty good trade agreement, and everyone was satisfied. And indeed, in 2019, President Trump declared it the best agreement in the world that he had pushed through. Now he doesn't like it, so we've got to deal with it.
I'm also interested in this idea that the reason that President Trump has also been making threats to annex Canada is similar to the reasons that he's threatening to take over Greenland. This question of critical minerals now, especially in your area in northwestern Ontario. What do you make of this idea, and how much is there behind that, and what do you think should be done to deal with it?
It is a bit akin to his interest in critical minerals in Ukraine, where they were looking for an agreement. We are the second largest country by geography in the world. We have many natural resources and, of course, critical minerals. I think that is part of it. I think his other interest is strategic. Greenland is important for strategic reasons, and with the ongoing climate change, the North and the Arctic is becoming more navigable through the straits. And of course, in strategic terms, both the Russian Federation and China have great interest in the Arctic. China, as it calls itself, a near Arctic nation, and Russia traditionally has had that much interest in terms of strategic military significance and also shipping across the northern passages.
Am I to understand that there's going to be some sort of Canadian, Ukrainian, Greenlandic resistance emerging from this entire issue?
Canada has been very engaged in the Ukraine war issue, and we have the largest Ukrainian diaspora outside of Ukraine is in Canada. It's been here for generations and is still growing. So there's a tremendous affinity with Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. I think also the peoples of the Arctic. Greenland is small, maybe 50,000 people live there. Most of them are indigenous. The same thing, too, for our archipelago, our northern territories in Nunavut, as we call it, maybe 150,000. But the issues are the same: the impact of climate change, the need to keep frontiers secure, and there has been much collaboration over the past while through the Arctic Council, but which involves all of the Nordic countries, but also bilaterally between Canada and Denmark, because Denmark has, of course, the territorial responsibility for Greenland. So there's a lot of activity there, as there is with Ukraine. We obviously are going to have to see what happens in discussions regarding a possible peace agreement in Ukraine. We have concerns about that.
If I were to understand correctly, you're saying that engagement is taking place to deal with this new problem of the relationship with the U.S. On many levels. So from state to state, from industry to industry, from business to business, and also on the international level, and the multilateral level. What does success look like to you then, as a product of all of these engagements on many levels?
Well, I think success will certainly be to minimize the economic impact or downturn, we certainly would want to wish to avoid recession. We want to keep Canada strong in terms of its economic reputation globally. We have a AAA rating and have had. We have the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7. These are all important aspects, and we also want to ensure that the quality of life that Canadians have, state-sponsored health care, all of the supports that are in our social network, the way many countries have them. We want those to continue. And of course, we want to have a very friendly and good relationship with our southern neighbor. That has been our tradition for centuries.
On the people-to-people level, though, there has also been some impact with regard to Canadian tourists, for example, not wanting to go to the US anymore. There's been a lot of, on the consumer level, a lot of efforts to buy Canadian and not buy American products. How much of this is irreversible, do you think? Is there a way to get back to the way things were, at least from the ordinary Canadian's perspective?
By dropping the tariffs. A good example is alcohol imports into Canada. Those are usually regulated by our provinces, but every province has decided to remove American products off the shelves, whether it's wine from California or bourbon whiskey from Kentucky. It's all gone. Canadians are making a very conscious choice to buy Canadian or to buy other than US in these wintry months, and we still have some winter here. Fresh fruits and vegetables are arguably a big choice item, but we do have free trade agreements with Peru. We receive produce from Mexico. We receive fruits and vegetables from Chile. So even in the supermarkets, there are little Canadian flags that indicate what is produced in Canada. And people are making a very conscious decision not to buy American products. The Americans are finding this a bit bewildering, I know, but we didn't start this. So it is difficult, and many Canadians are changing their minds. They're not going to go to Florida. They'll fly down to the Dominican Republic or Mexico or other countries in the Caribbean, or do what we're calling staycations, enjoy our own country and travel around it as well.
How much of these changes do you see as being permanent changes, even if Trump does take away the tariffs tomorrow? How much goodwill has been lost?
I think a lot of goodwill has been lost. The last time when steel and aluminum tariffs were put on us, that was in 2018, also on the Europeans and on Japan. We countered with tariffs of our own that were targeted. These were then removed as things came back to more or less normal. But the intensity with which President Trump is pursuing his agenda is what appears to be naked ambition in terms of the interests that he would see in our country. He's mentioned 51st state and annexation a few times. That goes very deep into the Canadian psyche. And we're generally a very easygoing people. People joke about us and say, well, Canadians, they're always apologizing and things like that. We're angry now. And that is a marked difference than before. And just a few months ago, I was at the Munich Security Conference and had conversations with a number of my contacts, including Americans and American senators that I know. And they joked about this 51st state thing because they don't think it's realistic. And I said, it's not funny for us anymore because we are beginning to see this as a threat to our existence as a sovereign country.
What would you say are Canada's cards in this game in the way that Trump would see it?
Well, he thinks we don't have cards, and he has said that we're basically function as a state, and the lines on the map are artificial. So when you start from that basis, it is rather difficult. Cards, if you assume, and you go back to his book, The Art of the Deal, not everything is about deals, and relationships are based on mutual respect and engagement. It is not a question of cards or no cards. And in the din and the furor of President Zelensky's visit to the Oval Office, one thing that President Zelensky said, and was barely heard, was, "I didn't come here to play cards." So I would echo that. This is a very serious business. And this is not about buying real estate in New York City or doing deals of that kind. This is the big time. This is strategic, and these are questions that have to be settled between countries in a fair and in a respectful manner.
I guess I suppose this was a question about leverage and whether Canada has it. If you were to be asked that, what would you say?
We do have leverage. We do have oil and gas that is exported to the United States. We have hydroelectricity from British Columbia that powers the western states. We have it from Quebec that powers the Atlantic states as well, and New York City. So that's all there as well. It is not, although one of our premiers has indicated that perhaps we should weaponize this, and President Trump has immediately said, "Well, that would be unfair." Well, we can peel the onion and see what is fair and what isn't fair, but we do have leverage if we choose to exercise it, and that is again not our way. But if we are pushed to the wall, it may be the way.
Thank you so much, Senator Boehm. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us today.
Vielen Dank. Thank you.
Vielen Dank.